The wine glasses clinked against the marble countertop, and laughter echoed off the pristine walls of our overpriced penthouse. From the outside, it looked like a perfect evening: friends, drinks, luxury. But inside me, something was rotting. I could feel it, like a sharp, rusted nail scratching at my gut. I stood at the kitchen island, smiling politely, playing the perfect hostess. I wore the dress Ethan had picked out for me, a soft silk number in midnight blue. He always said it made me look less tired, whatever that meant. His friends, loud, smug finance types, lounged on our velvet couch, sipping whiskey and chuckling over inside jokes I was never a part of. I poured more wine into Ethan's glass when he waved it at me without so much as a glance. I was halfway back to the kitchen when it happened. "Hey, babe," he called out, still grinning at something one of his friends had said. "Why don't you tell them that stupid thing you said earlier? You know, the one about stocks and whatever it was." That was hilarious. My heart sank. I glanced at his friends, they were already smirking. "Ethan, I don't think." And before I could finish, he picked up the glass of cold water and threw it across the room, right into my face. It was sharp, shocking, and deliberate. The cold drenched my hair, ran down my cheeks, and soaked the silk dress he had chosen for me. He laughed. "Why are you always acting like such an idiot?" he said, laughing louder now, gesturing to his friends like I was some comedy act they'd all paid to see. The room fell quiet, but not from sympathy. They were trying not to laugh too. And in that moment, I felt something shift. My hands clenched at my sides, and my heart thudded, not from humiliation but from realization. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I simply stood up straight, smoothed the wet fabric against my hips, and walked away. Not just from the room, but from the version of myself that let him treat me like that. When he came home hours later, slightly drunk and still amused by his own performance, his smile disappeared the moment he walked into the bedroom as I was packing. Not my bags, his. He stared at me. "What the hell are you doing?" I didn't answer immediately. I folded one of his monogrammed shirts with mechanical grace and placed it neatly in his suitcase. "What are you doing?" he asked again, slower this time, as though I were the idiot he always claimed me to be. "You threw a glass of water on me," I said, not looking up. "In front of your friends." "It was a joke," he scoffed. "Come on, don't be dramatic." They thought it was funny. I met his eyes then, for the first time in a long time. I saw them clearly. There was no warmth, no remorse, just irritation, like I was the one inconveniencing him. "I don't care if they thought it was funny," I said. "You embarrassed me, humiliated me. You think this is love?" He laughed bitterly. "You're overreacting. Jesus, Harper, you've always been too sensitive." I zipped the suitcase. "No, Ethan. I've just finally stopped being numb. Before Ethan, I was Harper Lane, independent but fiercely ambitious. But somewhere between our rushed engagement and his steady manipulation, I became someone else entirely, someone smaller. He never yelled, he never hit. But his insults came wrapped in jokes, his dismissals masked as teasing. He gaslit me so gently, so expertly, I didn't even notice the erosion until the foundation was gone. That night, after he left to cool off, I sat alone on the edge of the bed, soaking wet and shivering, staring at the city lights beyond the glass. And I made a promise. I would reclaim the version of myself I had abandoned for him. The next morning, I booked a stay at a modest boutique hotel downtown. Nothing extravagant, just enough to get me away. I left a note on the counter: "When you return, your things will be in storage. The locks will be changed. Don't contact me." I didn't cry when I walked out. I smiled. The world didn't stop for my heartbreak, neither would I. I returned to the office, to my old marketing job that Ethan always said was cute and beneath his network. It felt strange at first, walking through those glass doors again without feeling small. But slowly, I started to find my footing. And then fate handed me something I didn't expect: a challenge. Our company was competing for a major luxury brand campaign, the kind of deal that would skyrocket someone's career. My boss, Miranda, tough as nails and twice as sharp, looked at me across the conference table one morning. "Harper," she said, "you've got a unique edge. Personal branding meets emotional grit. I want you to lead the pitch." There was a beat of silence. Everyone turned to look at me, surprised. I had never been trusted with anything this major, not before. But I smiled. "I'll do it." And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. I worked late for the next several nights, crafting a pitch that wasn't just about marketing. It was about transformation, reinvention, women reclaiming their voices. I poured every ounce of my pain, my shame, and my fury into that campaign. My nights were long, but they didn't feel empty. And one evening, while I stood staring out the office window with a coffee in hand, my phone buzzed. I didn't answer. He tried again. Then a message, "You've made your point. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen. I thought about the cold water, the laughter, the sting of betrayal. Then I typed back, "No. You said enough." But Ethan wasn't the kind of man who accepted rejection quietly. A week later, he showed up at my office. He walked in like he still owned the place, still wore that expensive smugness like a tailored suit. "Harper," he began, "you've had your little rebellion. Can we stop this now?" My jaw tightened. "This is not a rebellion. It's liberation." He scoffed. "You're being ridiculous. You never said you were sorry," I said. "You said I was overreacting." He leaned closer, voice lowering. "You're nothing without me." It was in that moment I realized just how deeply he believed that. But he was wrong, so wrong. And I would show him just how much. Because the campaign pitch I was about to deliver, it was centered around that moment, the glass, the laughter, the humiliation. I turned it into a story of resilience, a woman rising from the ashes of public shame, a woman who refused to be silenced. And when I walked into that boardroom days later, chin high, heart steady, pitch in hand, I wasn't Harper the humiliated wife. I was Harper Lane. There's a kind of clarity that comes after the storm, the moment the sky clears and you realize you survived it. That was me walking into the boardroom for the biggest pitch of my career, feeling the weight of every bruise Ethan left on my soul and turning it into fire. I stood in front of the executives, 7 men in tailored suits and 1 woman with icy eyes and a diamond pen. The brand, Loserella, a luxury line redefining elegance for the modern woman. My competition, 3 top marketing firms with big budgets and bigger egos. But I had something they didn't, my story. "My name is Harper Lane," I began, voice even, eyes locked with every pair in the room. "And today, I'm not just here to pitch a brand. I'm here to pitch a revolution." The room quieted. I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared, an image of a woman with mascara streaming down her face, a shattered wine glass at her feet. "Let me tell you a story," I said. A woman stands in a room full of laughter, but none of it is hers. She's humiliated, publicly labeled too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But instead of breaking, she builds. Instead of crying, she carves. And in the ashes of her old self, she finds something fierce, something unshakable. I took a breath, then looked directly at the woman with the diamond pen. That woman is me. Silence, then applause. Not polite, not performative. That pitch won us the campaign. Not just the campaign, but headlines. The kind that read, "The Face of Feminine Reinvention, Harper Lane's Viral Pitch for Loserella, Divorce, Dignity, and Domination, How One Woman Turned Humiliation into Power Overnight." I became more than just a marketing strategist. I became a name, a symbol. And with the newfound recognition came opportunities, interviews, podcasts, panels. But most importantly, it brought freedom. I moved out of the hotel and into a loft downtown, with exposed brick, warm wood, and a wall of windows that let the sunlight spill across my new world every morning. It wasn't Ethan's glass prison, it was mine. Every square foot screamed independence. But as I rose, Ethan began to unravel. It started with petty texts, "You're making a fool of yourself. So this is who you are now, a victim with a microphone. No one will remember your name in 6 months." Then came the visits, unannounced, aggressive. I started documenting everything, just in case. Every threat, every voicemail. I wasn't afraid of him anymore, but I wasn't stupid either. Then one evening, I came home to find a single red rose taped to my door. No note, just a flower. My stomach turned. It wasn't romantic, it was a warning. Meanwhile, things at work were exploding in the best way possible. Miranda called me into her office one morning. Her usual sharp suit was softened by a rare smile. "You're being offered a senior creative director position," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "In Paris." I blinked. "Paris? Loserella wants you to join their global team. 6 months paid housing, a team. They're calling it the Harper campaign." I laughed out loud, not from amusement but from disbelief. A year ago, I was drowning in Ethan's shadow. Now, I was being flown across the world to lead a revolution. "I'll go," I said without hesitation. The night before I left for Paris, I hosted a small farewell dinner in my loft, just a few colleagues, some of my closest friends, and my sister, Lana. As we clinked glasses and laughed, I felt it, that warmth in my chest, the kind that doesn't come from wine or applause but from peace. But that peace didn't last. Because when I walked Lana to her car after the party, I saw him then, leaning against the hood of his car across the street, arms crossed. "What does he want?" Lana whispered. I shook my head. "Nothing I'm willing to give." He approached slowly, his expression unreadable. "You've really gone all in on this victim narrative, haven't you?" he said, voice low. "I'm not a victim," I replied calmly. "I'm a survivor." "There's a difference." He scoffed. "You've embarrassed me, turned me into some villain in your sob story. You did that all by yourself, Ethan." He stepped closer. "Paris won't fix you." I held his gaze. "I'm not going to Paris to fix myself. I'm going to celebrate the fact that I'm no longer broken." Paris was everything I needed and more. Cafe meetings under the Eiffel Tower, late-night brainstorms with artists who spoke in poetry. I wore confidence like a designer coat, elegant, tailored, and made just for me. I led the Loserella campaign across Europe. The tagline, "Own Your Ruins." It was raw, it was bold, and it resonated. Sales skyrocketed, and so did I. And then came him, Julien Armand, the brand's creative director, half French, half trouble. He had dark, sleepy eyes and a voice like velvet over gravel. He saw through me in a way Ethan never did, not because he was trying to control me but because he was listening. We worked late nights together, shared too many coffees. Then one evening, on the rooftop of our Paris office, under a string of fairy lights and a sky smeared with stars, he said, "You don't look like someone who's rebuilding. You look like someone who's already arrived." I looked at him, and for the first time in forever, I let someone touch my hand. But healing isn't a straight line. Because Ethan wasn't done. I got the call one morning from Lana. Her voice was shaking. "He posted a video." "What? Ethan? He's claiming you lied, that you made it all up to get famous. He posted security footage of you pouring yourself a glass of wine after the water incident. He says that proves you weren't traumatized." I felt the blood drain from my face. He was trying to discredit me. But this time, I wasn't helpless. I flew back to New York, held a press conference, and I didn't defend myself. I explained. I didn't cry immediately after being humiliated, I told the crowd, because trauma doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like pouring a glass of wine in silence just to keep your hands from shaking. The room went quiet, and then it exploded in applause. Ethan had underestimated me. He thought the only power I had was my pain. He forgot I also had a voice, and I was done whispering. The Loserella campaign earned multiple awards. I launched my own consulting firm, Ember Agency, focused on helping women rebuild their brands, their careers, their lives. I published a book, sold out every copy, spoke at conferences around the world. I didn't just survive Ethan's glass of water, I turned it into a tidal wave of change. As for Julien, he came to New York, sat beside me during interviews, held my hand backstage, told me I didn't need him, and I believed him. But I wanted him. That's the difference. And when he kissed me, soft and sure, I knew this time it wasn't about filling a void. It was about sharing the space I built for myself. Ethan always had a taste for control. It wasn't the loud kind, not in slamming doors or breaking furniture. It was the subtle kind, the kind that slipped into your bones slowly, convincing you that you were the problem, that your voice was too loud, your emotions too much, your dreams too ridiculous. And now, watching him unravel publicly while I rose with unapologetic force, it was his worst nightmare come to life. He couldn't stand that I was no longer the woman who flinched when he raised his voice. I had built an empire out of the ruins he left me in. I didn't just survive his humiliation, I turned it into a brand, a movement, and most of all, a new life. But he wasn't done. It began small. A former colleague of mine from the marketing firm sent me a message. "Hey, Harper. Weird question. Did you tell a reporter I got fired for misconduct?" Someone's spreading it around anonymously. I hadn't. Then a client emailed us, strange. Someone claiming to be from Ember Agency called and said you were shutting down soon. I wanted to confirm before renewing our contract. Another lie. He was trying to choke me with whispers, death by 1,000 paper cuts. But I wasn't who I was when I walked out of our penthouse with trembling hands and wet hair. I had learned to protect what I built. I hired a cybersecurity firm, traced the calls, the fake accounts. All of them led back to him. "You're making this easy," I said aloud as I read through the evidence neatly compiled in a PDF on my laptop. I should have been furious, but instead, I felt something colder, clarity. He wasn't dangerous because he was powerful. He was dangerous because he was desperate. And men like him, when cornered, lash out not with fists but with destruction disguised as logic. That evening, I called my lawyer. "I want a restraining order." The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. But in those 2 weeks, Ethan didn't disappear. He escalated. He showed up to my book signing. I saw him across the bookstore floor, leaning against a shelf like he belonged there, watching me sign copies for women who had tears in their eyes, thanking me for sharing their pain in my words. When our eyes met, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that said, "You think you've won, but I still know who you are." I called security. He didn't resist, just walked out like he had made his point. I didn't sleep that night. Julian saw it all on my face the next morning. He made us coffee and sat across from me in the kitchen of my new place. "He's not going to stop until you take everything from him," he said gently. "I don't want to be like him." "You're not." I looked at him. "But maybe I need to stop playing defense." That's when the idea formed. Not revenge, not spite. Closure. Public, irreversible, humiliating closure. A week before the court hearing, I got a call from Elle magazine. They wanted to do a special feature for their Women Who Reclaimed Themselves edition, a cover story, full spread. "I'm in," I said. And I told them everything, not just about Ethan but about the manipulation, the gaslighting, the cold control he exerted behind closed doors, the humiliation at the dinner party, the stalking, the lies, the campaign he launched to ruin my name. And I had the receipts. I handed over every screenshot, every voicemail, every IP trace that linked back to him. Elle's legal team vetted it all. When the issue dropped, it was war. The headline read, "From Humiliation to Power, How Harper Lane Made the Fall Her Foundation." And in the article, his name was printed, undeniably. He wasn't just the man who threw a glass of water. He was the man who tried to destroy the woman he lost because she refused to be quiet. The fallout was instant. He lost partnerships, his corporate clients severed ties, even his own brother, who had once defended him, released a statement distancing himself. I stayed silent. No gloating, no posts. Because the truth is, real power doesn't scream. It just is. The day of the court hearing, he looked smaller somehow. He didn't wear his usual smugness, just a gray suit that hung a little too loose and a silence that felt too heavy. The judge read through the evidence with arched brows. Then he looked at Ethan. "You're fortunate she's only asking for a restraining order and not pressing charges." Ethan opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then stopped. Maybe for the first time, he understood he had truly lost. The judge granted the order for 5 years, no contact, no proximity, no exceptions. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in years. Julian was waiting for me by the car. He didn't say anything, just opened the door for me and let me sit in silence for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you feel like it's over?" I looked at him. "No," I said honestly. "But I feel like he is." That night, I returned to my loft. I poured a glass of wine, not out of sorrow but celebration. I walked out to the balcony, let the city hum beneath me and exhaled everything. I thought about the night Ethan drenched me in front of his friends, calling me an idiot. I thought about how I had walked away, how every step after that became a building block, and how the woman standing here now, barefoot, powerful, unshaken, was born from that glass of water. I launched a new campaign the next month, not for a brand, but for women. A movement called the After Workshops, support groups, branding mentorship, free legal counseling for women escaping emotional abuse. The slogan, "You don't need to burn your past, you just need to stop living in its ashes." Julian and I never rushed things. He let me heal on my own time, and I loved him for that. One morning, as we lay tangled in sunlight and cotton sheets, he whispered, "I don't want to be your hero." "You're not," I whispered back. He smiled. "Good, because I didn't need saving. I just needed space to grow and someone who wouldn't be afraid of my wings." When you rebuild your life from scratch, you imagine you've turned over every stone, that the past can't possibly have any more secrets to spill. I believed that. I believed I knew everything I needed to know about Ethan until the email came. It was short, polite, laced with pain. "Dear Harper, I read your story. You know you don't know me, but I know Ethan. I was the one before you. I have something you need to see." Her name was Clara Bishop. I remembered hearing it once, maybe twice, mentioned offhand in the early days of my relationship with Ethan. He said she was crazy, that she became obsessed with him after they dated briefly in college. He spoke about her with a condescending smirk, like she was a footnote in his romantic resume. I never thought to question it. Now I wished I had. I met her in a quiet coffee shop 2 blocks from my office. She was in her early 30s, a little pale with tired eyes and nervous hands. She kept fiddling with the strap of her handbag like she wasn't sure she should be here. I introduced myself gently, and she smiled, but it was strained. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course," I replied. I wasn't sure what to expect. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather journal. "This belonged to me," she said. "From when I was with him." I wrote everything down because he always made me feel like I was crazy. I opened the journal carefully. Each page was dated, annotated, and heartbreakingly familiar. The entries detailed emotional manipulation, gaslighting, cruel jokes, public humiliations, even a few incidents eerily similar to mine, him throwing a drink in her face at a bar, mocking her emotions in front of colleagues, turning her private pain into social entertainment. I felt sick. "How long were you with him?" I asked. 2 years, she said quietly. "He broke me. I thought maybe I deserved it." I closed the journal slowly and met her eyes. "You didn't." She smiled again, this time with a little more light. "Neither did you." That night, I stared at my bedroom ceiling for hours. I had convinced myself that Ethan's cruelty had started with me, that maybe something in me had triggered his behavior, that maybe I had invited it, tolerated it, allowed it. But Clara's story shattered that illusion. It wasn't me, it was him. Always had been. And Clara wasn't the only one. With Clara's permission, I brought her journal to my lawyer. We discussed legal options, then we went public. With Clara by my side and an exclusive follow-up with Elle, Clara told her story. And just like that, Ethan's carefully curated image began to dissolve. More women stepped forward, a former intern, a colleague, a waitress from a Hamptons bar. All of them had stories, not of physical violence but of emotional warfare, devastating. He didn't leave bruises, he left doubt. The story exploded. The headlines now read, "Serial Emotional Manipulator, Multiple Women Speak Out Against Ethan Rodas, A Pattern of Power, How Charisma Became a Weapon in the Hands of a Charming Man." Ethan vanished from public view. His company released a statement saying he was stepping away indefinitely. His family stayed silent. But I wasn't done. Because while Ethan faded into the background, I was building something much louder. The After movement became more than a passion project, it became a revolution. We opened chapters in 10 cities, trained advocates, partnered with therapists and legal experts, launched anonymous storytelling platforms for survivors. Women who had stayed quiet for years finally found a place to speak. And for every story that came in, I felt stronger, not because of the pain but because of the proof. Proof that we were never alone. During this whirlwind, Julian remained my constant. He never tried to speak for me, never tried to manage the spotlight I lived under. He simply stood behind me, present, supportive, and unshaken. But I knew he was holding something back. One evening, we sat on the rooftop of my loft, drinking wine and watching the city blink beneath us. He was quiet. "Tell me," I said softly. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "I've been offered a creative director position in London." I nodded slowly. "That's amazing. I didn't want to tell you yet. You've had so much to carry." I smiled. "You're not something I carry, Julian. You're something I choose. He looked at me for a long time. Then, let me choose you too. My breath caught, and then he said it. I love you, Harper. Not the brand, not the story. You. I had been told I was loved before, but this time, it didn't feel like a collar. It felt like wings. As I stood at the podium weeks later, accepting an award for Social Advocate of the Year, I glanced down at the audience and saw Clara sitting front row, smiling through tears. I thought about the moment that started all this, the water, the laughter, the way my heart had shattered in silence. And then I spoke. We think silence protects us, I said into the microphone. We think if we don't speak, we won't be judged. But silence only protects the people who hurt us. My silence protected a man who thrived on humiliation. My voice, however, did something different. It built a bridge for every woman who thought her story didn't matter. No, we're crossing it together. The applause was thunderous, but what mattered most wasn't the clapping. It was the tears on Clara's cheeks, the dozens of women in the audience who rose to their feet, not as fans but as survivors. I walked off the stage into Julian's arms. You did it, he whispered. No, I said. We did. I released my final card, a documentary, The Glass Incident, One Night, 8,000 Voices. We premiered it at the Tribeca Film Festival. It wasn't about Ethan, it was about us, about every woman who had ever been humiliated and told it was just a joke, about the subtle violence of emotional abuse and how society still doesn't take it seriously until the bruises become visible. The film ended with a scene of me on stage, pouring a glass of water into a crystal vase and then smashing the vase. The symbolism was deliberate. Some stories don't need to be rewritten, they need to be shattered so something honest can grow from the shards. In the months that followed, Ethan's memoir was pulled by its publisher. Fact-checkers uncovered discrepancies. Interviews dried up. Lawsuits stacked. His brief reappearance faded into oblivion like smoke choking itself out. Me, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The After movement became global. We opened centers in 8 countries. Harvard asked me to speak. Time magazine named me Person of the Year, not for being a victim but for being a mirror, reflecting back to women what they had forgotten: power, grace, fire. Julian proposed on a spring morning in Florence, beneath a sky so blue it felt like a painting. He didn't get on one knee. He simply held my hand and said, "You don't need me to be whole, but I want to be your witness, your home, and your partner in every rebirth to come." I said, yes, not because I needed him but because I wanted him. And that's the most powerful kind of love, one born not from dependence but from choice. 6 months later, I walked down the aisle in a garden surrounded by women I once thought I'd never know. Clara stood beside me. Lana cried through the whole ceremony. Julian held my hands like I was a treasure he had waited his whole life to hold. And in the audience sat 100 women who had walked through hell and come out on the other side. When I said my vows, I didn't just speak to Julian. I spoke to them and to the version of myself that once sat alone in a cold apartment, soaked and shaking, thinking she wasn't worth more than a cruel joke. I am not the woman who was humiliated anymore, I said. I am not the broken, silenced girl you thought you could shape. I am the storm that comes after the silence. I am the woman who will never, ever be small again. As the ceremony ended and the sun dipped behind the trees, I saw a familiar face in the distance. There, standing beyond the fence, alone, watching. There was no rage in his eyes, only defeat. He didn't try to approach me. He didn't call out. He just stood there, suit wrinkled, expression hollow. And for a moment, I felt nothing, not hatred, not vindication, just peace. He had finally realized the version of me he tried to destroy wasn't coming back, it never existed. I walked away from the altar, hand in hand with Julian, without looking back. Because some stories don't end with confrontation. Some stories end with freedom. The final page of my book reads, "He threw a glass of water on my face in front of his friends, laughing as he called me an idiot." He thought that was the punchline. But the joke was on him because that night didn't break me. It built me.